So I picked up this Dinky number 9 catalogue from 1973, and really I went back a little bit too far, but I was curious as to what it had in it, and it was around as I was getting other things, so I thought, what the hey. So this is before my time, basically, but Dinky Toys often hung around for quite a while on the shelves, as I've since discovered. So you could always find older toys still on the shelves years down the line potentially, and a lot of their lines were very, very long lived anyway. So we'll just sort of bounce through this one and see what stands out at me. Dinky Toys, we give you more action, more fine detail, more accurate scale, and superb finish. Hard to argue with, really, because they kind of did. Fair dues to them. So interestingly, the pickup truck, the tow truck, in the far right hand corner, is in the packaging that my green Eagle transporter came in. And it's very much, that's the early style of dinky packaging that I'm familiar with anyway. Just as by way of example there. So various sort of obviously cars in double CV, all sorts of stuff like that. Although actually it says it's a Citroen Diane. So maybe that's a slightly different one, I don't know. Obviously Volkswagen Beetle. But interestingly, it calls it a sedan for some reason. Various opening bits and bobs on those to give them some extra playability. And the odd Mini. Now that's interesting. I didn't notice this when I was doing the scans at speed, but can you see 202, the Fiat Abarth 2000? I'm sure I had that in silver at one point, when I was little. If it's the one I'm thinking of, that sort of top bit kind of scoots off it in a way to open up the passenger compartment in a sort of futuristic style. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it's not entirely clear from the pictures, but it might be that one. And a few race cars, Fire Chief's car, the Range Rover that has always been in the catalogue so far as I can tell. Yeah, okay. The Mercedes. Now then, so this is quite interesting because as far back as 1973, we have the Shadow 2 mobile and the UFO Interceptor and Ed Straker's car there on the left-hand side of the page. Now, Shadow 2 is one that has eluded me. It looks quite similar to a Matchbox Battle King that I have. Whether or not they're actually the same mould, I wouldn't like to tell you. If I ever get one, I'll compare them side by side. But to this point in time, I've never actually seen a proper Shadow 2. It's always been the Battle King one. And in fact, I don't think I ever had the Shadow 2. So I don't know. It's just probably one that's eluded me. I did have a UFO Interceptor, and I think I mentioned this before, but it's a cap-fired rocket apparently. Cap's not included. So that thing must have gone like the blazes if you were actually if it was actually loaded at the time. But I don't think I ever knew that it did it. And I've just noticed, looking at this on screen, that this one's got a gold-coloured main thruster on the back, which is interesting because I don't recall them having. None of the ones that I've seen, the ones that I would associate as being the UFO Interceptor, had that I recall. It's curious. Okay, so on the next page, we also have another curiosity here because we've got the various Captain Scarlet vehicles, apparently the terrific trio. So we've got a Spectrum Pursuit vehicle, which is the 104 blue one. You see those a lot in various states of disrepair, and I think it's the aerials that tend to go bye-bye, along with most other things, it has to be said. In fact, that one's even got a missile coming out the front of it from the looks of it. The white one is the maximum security vehicles, possibly an MSV. I have seen that in my local retro store, actually. I never really got into Captain Scarlet. I've probably said this before as well, but it was never quite on my radar, so I wouldn't have been overly fussed by these. And then the final one is a Spectrum Patrol car, but it's interesting that they are in the 73 catalogue, because I guess Captain Scarlet probably came before UFO, but I think those UFO ones are actually quite new at that point. And then, interestingly, here we've got a green Thunderbird 2. And when I think Thunderbird 2 and Dinky, I think blue Thunderbird 2. For whatever reason they happen to colour it that way. So, very interesting to see that in that colour here. And obviously Lady Penelope's Fab 1, which is a sort of perennial favourite when you're talking about anything to do with Thunderbird's vehicles. So, all good stuff. Now this is interesting because, again, I can't remember if the last batch of Dinky catalogues I had went as far back as this, because I don't remember the Joe 90 vehicles being in there. Now, you may well not remember Joe 90. Even I barely remember Joe 90, and I'm ancient. So it was one of the early Jerry Anderson puppetry shows, and it did have some rather unique vehicles in it, like, for example, the flying car on the left there, which apparently is just called Joe's car. So that was quite an interesting vehicle of its time, and a very, very classic sort of Jerry Anderson style approach to things. The other car is Sam's car, apparently. I suspect that Sam was Joe's kind of handler, if you like. Slightly unfortunate turn of phrase on my part, given that Joe 90 was a kid. But basically, Joe 90 was also a secret agent, folks, who could have people's brainwaves imprinted over his own so that he could gain their special skills to allow him to complete particularly difficult missions. I think that's a reasonable synopsis. Quite why we then have a Dinky goods train set in amongst those licensed items, I don't know. And then on the right hand side, and this made me smile when I saw this in the catalogue, we have the Pink Panther mobile from the TV series, and it was a sort of if I remember rightly, it was a cartoon compilation, but the opening credits used this car with the Pink Panther in it as a sort of... But I think a kid drove the car, and the Pink Panther got out from inside it, if I remember rightly, and then he was in sort of animated form. But that made me chuckle when I saw that, because I had not seen it in the slightly later catalogues. So presumably that at some point that one fell out of favour. It looks like you could sort of... is that a central gyroscopic road wheel with pull-through something? So I guess it was kind of you could sort of get the wheel whizzing and then you let it go and then it went off. So that's interesting. Lunar roving vehicle. Now that turns up as I think it was it a Zygon war chariot? But the Zygon range fell outside of the catalogue, so that was years later. No, it doesn't. It reminds me of a war chariot, I think. I don't think it was actually the same vehicle as such, but it was. I think the concept was reused for something else. Anyway, you can always look at the other catalogues yourself if you're interested. And you've got a quite nice hovercraft and a dragster set, which is propelled in some fashion. And then we get into the buses and the taxis and the ring round with yellow pages, which was, for the youngsters amongst you, an early precursor of things like Google, where you had to open a book with pages to look for the service that you were desiring. So there you go. Moving on, we've got tractors, we've got a pickup truck, we've got a crane, all various things. That ambulance come hearse come Ghostbusters Ecto 1 has been in the catalogue forever, it would seem. I wonder how far, I wonder when it actually first appeared. It doesn't say new on it, so it might have been around for many, many years. And then we're on to fire engines and police vans and all that sort of good stuff. Bouncing through. So here's the master list pages now. where I traditionally hover should you wish to have a scan through. But it is quite telling, because you can see here that we've got this page, and then you've got a very long double page of things that are still current in 73. So hopefully by now you can pause it if you need to. And then there's another half page just for good measure on the next page. I'm sure I had that SO tanker. That SO tanker looks really familiar. But then again, we're into sort of trucks, and there's some new stuff. So we've got sort of road digging machines and that sort of thing there, steam rollers and the like. So there's sort of industrial stuff, and the odd once we've got sort of a Transformers G1 grapple-esque looking thing, and then various other sort of utility farmy sort of vehicles, and a bin man's lorry there. And then of course we've got the guns. Got to have some guns. So we've got various sort of towed artillery pieces and parachuting jeeps and sort of very large missile launchers apparently as well. So that's them. They've got tanks, of course, because we can't do without tanks, and then amphibious vehicles. These look vaguely familiar. I think they've been in the catalogue for a while as well. But of course, at this point, they're probably relatively new, whereas the other catalogues I've looked at have been older. And so some boats and hovercraft there as well. This is quite interesting, because here we've got Harriers, and I was looking at that 729. So we've got, on the left hand side, we've got a Sepcat Jaguar, which I'm familiar with as a jet. But the 729, the multi-role combat aircraft, is not named. But that has to be a Panavia Tornado, one of the very earliest ones, I guess. And I wouldn't have put them as early as 1973, but there you go. I mean, when I was growing up, I think tornadoes were kind of top of the range basically. So that's quite interesting to see them in there in 73. It looks like a tornado, and the fact they haven't named it suggests that it was as it says new. So maybe it didn't have an official designation at that point, and it was more sort of prototype. But obviously, Dinky were getting ahead of the curve in issuing a toy for it. And then of course we've got Phantoms on the right there, and Sea Kings and so on the left, Spitfires. And then we're into the Dinky Kits pages, and of course Meccano, which is Dinky, to all intents and purposes. That's the mother group. But quite a few more sort of old school Meccano sets there than perhaps have featured in the catalogue before. And then the plastic Meccano, yeah, that definitely featured through quite a few issues. We've definitely seen those before. And then on the final page, as usual, 1973 Meccano Limited, Liverpool. Despite it being a Dinky catalogue, Dinky was a subset of Meccano, and interestingly printed in West Germany. Okay, so yeah. And it looks like they were bringing in a bigger range, a bigger sort of scaled models there as well, which they're advertising at the back. So yeah, so this is all. It's interesting because what I was hunting for was the first Dinky Toys catalogue with the first eagle in, Space 1999 eagle, because I was particularly interested to try and figure out when they first arrived, because then I could sort of try and date the sort of early eagle that I think I've got. So I was interested to be able to put a year on it that was, the year by the catalogue. So anyway, so that was a fairly quick whiz through that one. But as I say, relatively little in there that I would have been particularly interested in, apart from perhaps the Jerry Anderson staples that I like at the front. But I'm intrigued by the Pink Panther one. If I saw that, I'd probably grab one just for giggles, really, as much as anything else. Because I do like, the Dinky build quality is brilliant, and I am going to be doing another video fairly soon on another rather unusual and late Dinky model. So do keep an eye on the channel for more actual real world examples of the toys. So cheers for now.